everyone, I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. After Democrats threatened to move on without them, Senate Republicans asked for an audience with the president to discuss their coronavirus relief proposal. 10 Republican senators met with President Biden in the Oval Office Monday evening. Mr. Biden did not answer questions at the start before talks got underway.
I feel like I'm back in the Senate, which I like the best of everything I did.
Hey guys.
All right. Thank you, folks.
Hey guys, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
These are the 10 GOP senators who came up with the proposal with a price tag that stands at about 1/3 of President Biden's plan. In a moment, we'll walk you through their key differences. Those Republicans could give the White House bipartisan support for the next coronavirus aid package. The Biden administration has made working across the aisle a priority. But if the parties are too far apart, Democrats plan to pursue a process known as budget reconciliation. It would allow Mr. Biden's plan to be passed with a simple majority in the Senate, but would potentially alienate Republicans. Here's how the White House is describing the goal of today's bipartisan meeting.
The president has been clear since long before he came into office that he's open to engaging with both Democrats and Republicans in Congress about their ideas. What this meeting is not is a forum for the president to make or accept an offer. So I think that's important to convey to all of you. And his view, it remains what was stated in the statement last night, but also what he said on Friday, which is that the risk is not that it is too big. This package, the risk is that it is too small.
The Senate is working to quickly pass pandemic relief before the impeachment trial of former President Trump begins. It could get underway as early as next week. But this past weekend, key members of Mr. Trump's legal defense left the team. A Trump advisor tells CBS News the decision was mutual. The former president reportedly wanted them to renew baseless arguments about a stolen election. Those claims have repeatedly failed in court. Nancy Cordes, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Anita Kumar, and Eugene Scott join me now. Nancy is CBS News chief White House correspondent. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. Anita is a White House correspondent and associate editor for Politico. And Eugene is political reporter for The Washington Post, as well as host of the podcast, The Next 4 Years. Welcome to you all. I call this a power panel. Nancy, let me start with you. These two coronavirus relief proposals, how far apart are Senate Republicans from what the White House has proposed?
Well, first and foremost, the White House package is 3 times the size. So right out of the gate, that's a very big difference. In some ways, though, the packages are quite similar, especially when it comes to vaccinating and testing the American public. There, the two plans look almost identical. They've both got about $160 billion that they would put towards ramping up vaccinations and testing. So far, so good. But then, if you look at the rest of the GOP plan, most of it has the same line items that the Democratic plan does, but just less money behind it. So, for example, when it comes to unemployment insurance, the White House wants to give unemployed people $400 a week through September. The Republicans want to give people $300 a week through June. Stimulus checks. The White House wants to hand out $1,400 per person. The Republican proposal is $1,000 per person, and there is an income cutoff of about $50,000 for an individual, $100,000 for a couple, and on and on. So, there you have some hope that perhaps the two sides could meet in the middle somewhere because they want to do the same things. They just don't want to do it at the same intensity. But then there's a third batch of policies in there, Elaine, that are in the White House plan but do not exist in the Republican plan. $350 billion for state and local governments, for example, money to help ailing transit agencies, money for tribal governments, money to help renters who have fallen behind. And so that is a difficult area to bridge the gap, since Republicans basically want to keep the package small, don't want to spend money on a lot of things that they view as extraneous or expensive. But you've heard the president say repeatedly he wants to go big, and he wants to spend money across a range of needs. And so, we'll have our an opportunity to see in this meeting whether there are commonalities that can give them some hope that they might be able to reach some kind of bipartisan deal within this very, very short time frame that the White House has laid out.
You know, Caitlin, it was interesting over the weekend. One of these 10 Republican senators, Ohio's Rob Portman, argued that passing an aid bill without Republicans could have additional consequences. Let's go ahead and listen to that.
Not in the interest of the party, of the Democratic Party to do that, in my view, because it will set President Biden down a path of partisanship that I think will poison the well for other bipartisanship we'll need on so many issues.
So, Caitlin, how much will these negotiations tell us about how things will go for the next 2 years?
They could tell us a lot. And what Portman was suggesting there is kind of two things that Republicans want to accomplish through this round of COVID negotiations. One, they want to use whatever little power they have in the minority to be able to shape legislation and to block some of the Democratic priorities, things like the minimum wage. And they're also seizing on this idea that they know that Biden wants bipartisanship. He campaigned throughout the course of the Democratic primary as someone who could work across the aisle with Republicans. In fact, he often came under criticism from some Democrats who said that he underestimated the modern Republican Party. But the Republicans know that that's what Biden wants. He wants bipartisanship if he can get it. And so they're trying to kind of seize on that. Democrats, meanwhile, are saying, look, why have a majority if you can't use it? They are, I think it's remarkable or notable that the meeting tonight is with Republican lawmakers. There are some Democrats who have said, wait a minute, why aren't we in the Oval Office here? So there is this pressure coming on Biden to move ahead through reconciliation with kind of this pressure from Democrats of using the majority that they have when they can. Biden has left the door open. He's leaving lots of different options on the table. Today, the White House press secretary said that they want to find the bipartisan route, but of course, not ruling out reconciliation because they think that this package is urgent. So what Republicans are trying to do is be involved in this process and kind of use whatever leverage they have in that regard and try to exercise some kind of muscle to shape this legislation. But the pressure is increasing also from some Democrats who want the president to push their priorities now because we have midterms in 2 years, and those are always difficult for the president's party in power. So why not use what you have now? And so those are kind of the conflicts shaping ahead of this meeting.
Well, Eugene, in the early days of the Trump administration, Republicans used the reconciliation process to pass the 2017 tax cuts. Why do they see things differently now that the shoe is on the other foot?
Well, the most simple answer is that the occupant of the White House is different in the sense that it's obviously someone from a different party. As you noted, the Republican Party doesn't fundamentally have a problem with reconciliation, and that's why critics of the GOP are calling all of these claims that are rooted in concerns about unity insincere. Ultimately, what Biden is going to be encouraged to do by Democrats largely is not to concede to Republicans based on what many families say they need and what many people in the base of the Democratic Party got behind Biden with the hope that he would do. What Biden will ultimately do isn't really clear, but some are advising that if he is not able to deliver everything he was hoping to for his base and Americans outside of the base, that he should make it clear that it is the fault of the Republicans for not being willing to back the ideas he proposed.
Well, Nancy, let's go ahead and listen to West Virginia's Republican Governor Jim Justice sounding closer to the White House's proposal than Senate Republicans.
And at this point in time in this nation, we need to go big. We need to quit counting the egg-sucking legs on the cows and count the cows and just move forward and move right now. We need to go big, and if we waste some money now, well, we waste some money.
So, Nancy, what should we take away from that, given that he, of course, comes from the same state as one of Democrats' most important votes?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, you should take away from it the fact that Jim Justice really has a way with words. But beyond that, there's clearly a disconnect in many cases between Republican governors and mayors and Republicans in Congress. And the reason for that is very simple. Republican governors or Democratic governors have to balance their budgets. Senators don't. And so you've got a bunch of state and local leaders who are looking at massive budget shortfalls because of COVID-19 and who are really desperate to find ways to make up those shortfalls without having to lay off teachers, firefighters, and other first responders. So Republican governors many of them are much more open to this notion of $350 billion for state and local governments than Republicans in Congress, who feel that it is a slippery slope and that then it would lead to even more outlays for state and local governments who should be responsible for their own funds. I think that the pressure that's coming from governors of all stripes helps explain why you see some Republicans going to the White House tonight who are not usually in that bipartisan group who try to work very closely with the other side. For example, you've got Jerry Moran, senator from Kansas. You have Tom Tillis, just reelected from North Carolina. You've got Todd Young of Indiana. These may be Republican senators who have not necessarily always looked that favorably on big spending packages, but they realize that their own states are hurting and they're getting pressure from the leadership in those states to do something. Whether it's going to be as big as what the White House wants to do remains to be seen, but they realize that if all Democrats hang together, they can pass the really big package without any Republican support. And that is part of what is motivating Republicans to go to the White House and try to put their stamp on this legislation.
The timing of this GOP meeting is interesting as well. It comes about a week before this upcoming impeachment trial. And Anita, I want to ask you about that. What is it that we know about why these attorneys left the Trump defense team, and what does their strategy look like with this new counsel?
Well, first, I want to take you back a little bit, which is that President Trump has had such a difficult time finding attorneys in the first place. So it's been, several weeks that we knew that an impeachment was coming, and a lot of the impeachment attorneys he used the first time around said they didn't want to be involved this time. The last group that he had that just left this weekend were, led by someone that Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina put him in touch with. They're telling us that that decision to part ways was mutual, but there are some people saying that it's actually really about, as you suggested earlier, that President Trump still has not really conceded this election. He has not acknowledged that he didn't win. In fact, he's still saying to people privately, and we haven't heard from him publicly lately, but the last comments we've heard from him are still that he won. He is saying that he won, and there are attorneys that don't want to fight that battle. They want to fight the battle of, whether he incited this, riot at the Capitol on January 6th, whether whether a president who's left office can be impeached. Is that a constitutional is that correct? Can that happen? They don't want to relitigate who won the election in November. And so that was part of the issue. The other part of the issue I heard is that this was a really low-key team. They weren't out there in front of the media talking like President Trump likes. That was what he liked about his team the first time around. They were out there talking on television all the time. And so he was looking for a new team. What does this tell us? It tells us that he is not prepared for this impeachment trial that's going to start in a week. He has very little time now to get some documentation to the House on what his, how he's going to fight this and what his response is. There are attorneys, and I believe this new team is going to try to talk about whether a sitting president that's no longer in office can be impeached, while the president still insists that he wants the team to talk about the election. So there's a disconnect. We could see some more changes in the next week. We could see them still trying to figure out what this legal strategy is.
And Caitlin, FEC filings show that former President Trump and the RNC raised $86 million after the election in the final 5 weeks of 2020, when Mr. Trump was pushing baseless election conspiracies. Where is that money going? Do we know?
Right, so that money came towards the end of the year, and that is less money brought in than in the 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks right after the election, when the president and his campaign were pushing these baseless theories, baseless conspiracy theories about the election, claiming it was rigged, trying to raise money. And in the weeks after the election, the immediate weeks after the election, they were largely successful. They raised about $200 million in those 19, 20 days right after the election, pushing those claims to their email list. That started to peter out towards the end of the year, of course, as the president lost lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit. However, it's still a significant amount of money, and some of it goes to the RNC, some of it was for his campaign, but some of it went to his own personal PAC, the Save America PAC. And that PAC has about $30 million on hand, and that means that Trump can use that to support his political life beyond the presidency. So he can hire people, he can travel, he can kind of promote his own political ambitions, such as they are, after he has been president. The big question I have, however, is who is going to pay for these legal fees? Remember, in the first go-round of impeachment last year, the RNC picked up much of the tab because he was the sitting president. They have not committed to do so, and that's a big question. So will some of the money have to be used for his legal defense as well? Remains an open question.
Well, Eugene, as we look at where the Republican Party heads after former President Trump, we're seeing conflict in the House as Democrats are pushing to remove Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to either resign or be removed from her committee assignments. I'm wondering, Eugene, what your sense of it is. What are you hearing? Are there indications about how this could end up? Because I would imagine that privately, there may even be some Republicans who would support what Democrats are pushing for, but given the climate and the political landscape and what happened on January 6th, may be reluctant to speak up publicly about that.
Well, that's certainly true. We know that there are Republicans in the House that are not as far right as Greene, but who are very aware that she represents a very vocal constituent in the GOP. And supposedly she also has the support of the former president. And that is shaping how a lot of these GOP lawmakers are responding to her, if at all. But what she also is something of a nuisance for Democrats who believe that not addressing the politics and the behavior that she brings to Washington could lead to more people like her deciding that they want to pursue a career in Congress and being effective. I spoke with one congressman and said one of the reasons why he felt the need to respond very aggressively to Greene and a few other Republican lawmakers who seem very sympathetic and supportive of the base that many Democrats are criticizing very vocally is that they want to prevent the next wave of Donald Trumps from coming to Washington. And so that is what much of this response and this initiative is about.
And Anita, you have some reporting on how some last-minute appointments from the final days of the Trump administration could be locked in for the Biden government. What can you tell us?
Sure. President Trump did what a lot of presidents do, which is at the end, during the transition, he appointed a lot of his allies and aides to different boards across the government. And what we're seeing is the Biden team is really looking at if they can remove some of those folks from those boards. And what we're finding out is it's going to be very, very difficult. A lot of those boards have fixed years that you serve. Once you're appointed, you could be appointed for 5 years or 6 years. So they could outlive this President Biden's first term or only term if he has only one. And they really can't do much about it. And so there are a few boards, particularly one at the Pentagon, where President Trump appointed both Corey Lewandowski and David Bossie, two of his campaign aides, longtime allies of his. That board, what we're finding out is that they are removing them. They never really fully got on, but they are saying they are not putting them on. But that's in the minority. That's a particular board that is up to the Secretary of Defense. They serve at the pleasure. It doesn't have a particular term to it. So what we're going to find is a lot of aides of President Trump and allies of President Trump around different places, and they're going to be there probably for the next 4 or 5 years.
All right, Nancy Cordes, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Anita Kumar, and Eugene Scott. Yet another busy Monday in Washington. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.